we are moving to the next presentation, which will be conducted by you, Maria, by Maria Arnst. So it will be devoted to the position of the DPO and the choice, like every company meets this choice at certain period of the development, whether you should hire outsourced DPO or keep an in-house, keep doing things in-house. So Maria will compare the advantages and disadvantages of both ways. I have to add that Maria is an author of the commentary to the Article 37 and 38 and 39 of the GDPR that is published by at the gdprtext.com. So if you would like to read those commentaries and get inside this topic deeply, so please follow the link that I'll share in the commentary in the comments below this video. So without further ado, Maria, I'm turning the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Yes, indeed, gdprtext.com is a great resource, and I am so very glad to be at least a little part of it. My presentation is taking its sweet time to load, so I think I need another minute to share the screen. Which I apologize for, but I am.
It's no problem. I'll use this time to remind every participant, every audience member to like the video. It really helps to trend this video higher in the YouTube channels and suggested videos. And you may also press subscribe and bell buttons. You'll be able to even if you don't follow the Data Privacy Office, you'll get a notification when we next have a webinar or GDPR day next year. So if you press this button, you'll be notified in advance.
Okay, let me try with the presentation right now. I am not greatly prepared, as you can see. Actually, I cannot say that. I'm prepared. It's my laptop who is not prepared. So
okay.
It's still loading.
Apple is
but
not
I'm gonna...
always okay, right?
How dare you? Yeah, that's the for those of you who are out of context of this joke, Sergey and I are in a little bit of a battle, probably a lifetime battle.
We belong to
as
different
an Apple
teams.
user. Yes.
And Samsung user. So I'm in the team of Samsung and Maria is in the Apple team. So
yeah. And it's happening. Look at that. I think Apple just heard that it's not doing too well.
Yeah.
Can you see my presentation now?
Yeah, I can see it. Great.
Fantastic.
Great design as always.
Thank you very much. I find that the visual aspect of the presentation helps to understand the content, especially when it is about something as dry as data protection might be sometimes. Anyway, I'm already behind the schedule, behind the time, so I'm gonna speed up a little bit. My presentation is going to be about a position of a data protection officer. And very often, clients, I work as an external consultant right now. I used to work as an in-house data protection officer and data protection manager, and anyway, an in-house expert, and now I work as an external one. And very often companies ask that question: are we allowed to have an external DPO? Do we need an internal specialist at all? And things like that. So quite often this question comes up. So my presentation is here to clarify what are the differences, what are the advantages, the disadvantages of both models, how does it actually work, and what is DPO for, actually. So shortly about me, I hope that the slides work with me right now. Okay, this is, they're not changing, aren't they?
No, they aren't. Shall you try to share it again?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it again. I think my laptop is not really kind of
it
agreeing
happens.
with working for hours straight anymore.
Oh, cool.
Oh, can you
Now I
see
can
it?
see it. Yeah, it
Okay, now you
works.
see too many slides. Okay, fantastic. It looks like it responds. So very shortly about me, again, because I'm so behind the schedule. My name is Maria. I work mainly with the data protection, data privacy office, which Sergey is also representing, which Sergey actually co-founded. I have several certifications. I don't love speaking about myself in the context of certifications because I don't think this is what defines people, but it gives us a little bit of credibility. So I have a IPP certification, which is an international one, CIPM, and then I also have a German one, which is a TÜV certification. I work, as I said, as a data protection or data privacy consultant. I specialize in GDPR. I also work as an external data protection officer for several companies. I run a podcast, which is called Nothing to Hide. It is in Russian. I have a long-term, well, not really a plan, but an idea of having a podcast in English. So stay tuned for that. And I'm also a privacy enthusiast, which doesn't tell a lot about me in a professional context, but at least it says that I really like my job, I guess. And my talk right now is going to be, again, when the slides are going to work with me and start. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So my talk today is going to be about data protection officers. We're going to first talk about why we need a data protection officer, why we might need or might not need. What do they do? What is it actually, this position about? And then the core part is going to be about the pros and cons of the in-house data protection officer and an external one. And I'm going to try to put a theory around my own experience. So it's going to be a little bit of both practice and theory. And obviously everybody is wondering what model is the best, what model to choose inside the organization, in-house or outsourced. So I'm going to try covering that. So yeah, so if you are wondering whether you need a DPO or not, it is a completely legit question. This is something that every organization who hears about GDPR and knows that they probably need GDPR, and this is a lot of companies nowadays, probably almost every company nowadays, they hear GDPR, they think DPO. Very often these two are like, it comes together, it goes together. I hear GDPR, I think DPO. So do we actually all need it? And GDPR actually has sort of an answer to that. The short answer is no, not every organization needs a DPO, a data protection officer. And you might need it, obviously, as part of your compliance, because there is an article in GDPR that tells that certain companies are obliged to have that position. They have an obligation to appoint a DPO. And those companies are, first of all, public authorities, public bodies, which is probably out of scope of this conference. Secondly, second category of companies who are obliged to have a DPO are those whose core activity is to regular and systematically monitor data subjects. This might sound like a very broad definition, and unfortunately, as nice as GDPR is in many ways, it also leaves a lot of room for common sense interpretations, and regular and systematic monitoring is probably one of those cases. So there is no clear exact definition about what is this regular and systematic monitoring. It does, however, say that all types of profiling is one of those. So if your core activity is monitoring of data subjects, you're obliged to have a DPO. And the last category that is obliged of companies, that is obliged to have a data protection officer, is companies whose core activity it is processing of special categories of data on a large scale. Now, special categories of data is probably more or less clear. They are at least defined in Article 9. It says that data about health, medical related data, ethnic origin data, data about labor union memberships, data about political views, sexual orientation. So that's clear. There's a very exact list of types of categories of data that are considered special. However, large scale, again, is not really defined in the GDPR. It doesn't, and it probably will never give you a number of when does a large scale start. Is it 3 elements of data a day? Is it 3,000 data elements a day? Is it the frequency that makes it the large scale? Is it the amount of data? So that is the point where we have to kind of use common sense. However, it's still a law that if you are processing special categories of data on a large scale, you are obliged to have a DPO. So, okay, there is one aspect of that. You might be obliged to have a DPO. Another aspect, though, is that some companies go for a DPO position even though they don't, they're not obliged to. They are not processing special categories on a large scale. They're not, their core activity is not to monitor data subjects. But they find it very useful to have a DPO because of the function of that person, of that position, which is consulting about GDPR. You will need somebody who will navigate you through the world of data protection. You might be able to do it yourself. You might be interested in doing it yourself, but at the same time, somebody has to do it. Somebody has to be responsible for that, for consulting you on how to assess the risk in terms of privacy, how to find a legal basis. Is it a contract? Is it a consent? Can we use a consent? Should we go for legitimate interest? How to apply technical organizational measures? What of those organizational and technical measures to choose? And then there is the whole story with processes that we need to build around the GDPR, which is the response to a breach. How do we react when the breach is happening? Because if we don't react, we might be fined, and we most probably will be. There are a lot of fines about that. How do we reply to data subject access requests or data subject deletion requests? We have a deadline that is clearly defined in GDPR. Somebody has to take this responsibility, right? And then there is another whole new world about the documents in GDPR. Mira already talked about it a little bit, about the data processing agreements that you need to have with your vendors, or maybe you are the vendor yourself, so you don't want to have this 300,000 agreements given to you. You want to have your terms. So all of these things, somebody has to take care of them. So some companies decide to go for a DPO, not because they are obliged to, but because it simply makes their life easier. And then the question that my presentation kind of circles around is it okay to have an external DPO? The answer is, of course, yes. For some, it is not so obvious, because some think that if I have an obligation to have a DPO, it probably means I have to employ that person. It has to be somebody who's inside the team. And there is no legal definition of how it should be. So there is nothing that prohibits you from having an external consultant. The same as there is nothing that prohibits you to have an internal team member who is a DPO, who is responsible for your data protection program. So let's figure out what is the difference and how to choose your model. But before we dive into that, let's first also briefly touch the subject of what do a DPO do, actually. So we figured we need a DPO, or we decided that we need a DPO. So what do they actually do, those data protection officers? And luckily, GDPR also gives us that answer as well. I think it's the Article 38 or 37, one of those, or 39, one of the three. And you can broadly, or on a generalizing, you can divide all of the tasks of DPO into three sort of categories. One of those would be contact with data protection authorities and data subjects. So DPO is the one who is coordinating your image to the outer world, your data privacy image to the outer world. That's why you need to have the contact of your DPO in the privacy notice, or wherever you decide to transmit your information about data privacy. Now, it is not obligatory to post the name of the data privacy or data protection officer. I often see names of data protection officers. There's no obligation to do that. You need to post the contact. So data protection authority or data subject, they have to have a way to talk to your DPO. And this is done for several reasons, actually. First, because data protection authorities, when they reach to the company, they want somebody to speak their language. They want somebody who will be able to communicate in terms of GDPR. So both sides win in that situation. For you, it is easier that somebody is taking care of that communication. For data protection authorities, also easier that companies go into cooperate, and because data protection authorities are actually not interested in fining the companies. They're interested in changing their practices. So they will give you 300 chances before they fine you. And by giving those chances, they will communicate with you. They will send you letters. They will send you emails. They will ask questions. They will give you 300 chances. So you need somebody who will be able to interpret those chances and to bring them into action. So there is that role. Obviously, it doesn't mean that this person has to take care of it alone. Especially in the context of data subject rights and data subject contacting the organization. I, for example, once worked for a company where we had 4 people that were responsible for requests of data subjects. 4 people whose job it was only to take care of the data subject access requests and data subject deletion requests. Of course, it was a corporation, and obviously it doesn't apply to each and every organization. It doesn't mean, please don't be afraid that you suddenly need to hire an army of data protection people. Obviously not. But I'm just giving you an example of how a DPO might not be able to do this work alone. The second task of a DPO is obviously, well, I keep saying obviously, but it's probably not obvious, or at least not for everyone, is consulting. So somebody who, as I mentioned during the previous slide, somebody who navigates you through GDPR, somebody who is translating GDPR to you, who is telling you what to do, and who is answering your questions, somebody to whom you can ask about what GDPR means, what is it all about, how do we do this DPIA, what is a DPIA actually, it is a data protection impact assessment, how do we assess the risk of this or that processing, how do we apply technical organizational measures, and do we apply them at all? So all of the things that have to do about explaining data protection rules to you, your DPO is there for you. And the last but not least, again, category of tasks that DPO covers is control. It means that DPO has a responsibility of your compliance status. And in practical terms, it means that not only they answer your questions when they are asked, but they also might ask questions themselves. I mean, they must ask you questions. They might initiate an audit. They might ask for access to processes and to data privacy activities and things like that. So they are checking your general compliance status. And yeah, I see Sergey switched on a video. You probably have a question or a comment.
Yeah, there is a comment question from Andrew. So is there a negative for a business to appoint a DPO? For instance, when they don't have an obligation to do so?
Well, one of the most obvious probably is that probably nobody's going to do that job for you for free. So it is an investment. And I say investment and not a cost because very often data protection experts, whether it is officers or managers or whatever, they are seen as well, they are not always seen as something that brings company brings money into the company. And that is partially true and partially not. I think that the value that DPOs and data protection experts bring is more long-term, is much long-term perspective than, say, a marketing manager or a salesperson even. So in that regard, it's sometimes very hard to see that value that the data protection person is going to bring in. So you will be told what to do by a DPO. Okay. And what they are telling you is very often something that you might not see value in right away, because your priorities might be to sell the product right now or to close that deal right now. We need the money. Whereas a DPO will tell you, listen, this is not GDPR compliant. We need to change the process. We need another week or a month to fine tune it. So that is the negative, obviously. And I'm going to talk about it in the context of internal and external ones.
One more question. Actually, a continuation of the first question. What about these voluntarily appointed DPOs? Does this mean extra obligations for an organization when they appoint?
No, actually, no. It's the same as you appoint. I mean, the only thing that you choose is you have that you lose. I mean, is that you have another specialist to pay.
All right.
But again, there is a lot of value that DPOs bring in. It just might be not something that you see right away or feel or can relate to right away.
I see.
But no, there is no extra obligation that comes with the position. However, if you appoint an internal DPO, for example, certain legislations offer extra what is it called? Labor protection, probably, to a position of a DPO. As Germany, for example, offers a special protection to a position of a DPO, which makes it more difficult to fire that person than an average employee, for example. So there's that element, but it's a national legislation thing.
So if you hire a DPO voluntarily, then you won't be able to fire this person easily.
Yeah, well, in both situations, whether it is voluntarily or you're obliged to hire a DPO, certain legislations will prohibit you or will make it difficult for you to fire that person easily. And it is done actually, especially for the reason, because it is hard for companies, for management to relate to the value that DPOs bring. And very often it might come to a decision of, do we need to close that deal, or do we want to close that deal, or do we want to comply with the GDPR? And sometimes it's a difficult sort of balance to reach.
Okay, thank you for answering these questions. For those members of audience who have not yet asked a question, please go to the comments below and ask them, and I'll read them aloud.
Yeah. And I'm going to move to the next section, which is the pros and cons of in-house and external DPOs. Let's talk first about the in-house. So you decided you need a DPO, or you want one. You probably are not obliged to, but you want one. And you are thinking about hiring an in-house specialist, or maybe train one of the already existing employees. One of the main disadvantages that this position, that this model will bring, is that there is a possibility of internal pressure to that person. Now, you might be thinking there's always a possibility of internal pressure to a specialist, whether it is a marketing manager, or it is a salesperson, or it is a developer. If they're part of the team, they're part of the social interaction, right? So there's always this internal pressure. However, why am I putting that as a separate sort of point to consider in the context of data protection? Because exactly what I talked about, exactly because of what I've talked about right now answering the question, is that the position of a data protection, whoever, data protection officer, data protection manager, is oftentimes seen as something that doesn't bring value right away. And it might be true, but this value that they bring in the long term might be so much more that anything that whoever is able to bring right away. So that's why it is often a high possibility that there will be pressure from the management, there will be attempts to manipulate the opinion of a data protection officer. And not only it is bad for the person themselves, for the DPO, but it is also very dangerous for the conflict of interest. And GDPR mentions the importance of no conflict of interest in the position of DPO, I think twice or three times. It especially emphasizes this point that it is crucially important to not have a DPO that is possible to have a conflict of interest. That's why you cannot appoint a DPO who is already a CEO, for example, or somebody who is a head of development, who is taking decisions about how data is going to be processed, why is it going to be processed, and with which means, and so on. This person cannot be controlled and control at the same time. They cannot be a DPO and head of development at the same time. And we already have seen fines in that direction for the conflict of interest of a DPO. So that is a big danger. Another thing is that there is mindset very often. I mean, it's changing. I hope it's changing. I hope I'm not in a sort of tech bubble, but training of a person is often seen as it implies more work. So if I am trained, if a company pays for my training, they will expect more work to be performed. So the motivation of training and improving the qualification is both lowers from the side of a DPO themselves and the company too. So this is something that is important for data protection experts. It is super important to stay on track. And thankfully, Mira already talked about it too in her presentation, where she says that this landscape is changing all the time. I mean, one thing is the GDPR itself, right? It's a huge and not the most easy to read text, but there is also case laws that are appearing all the time. Cases that are appearing all the time. There are all sorts of guidances, and then there is this privacy shield that was cancelled. Then there is Brexit. Then there is all of these things that we have to consider that we need to keep on track. So we need constant training. So that might be difficult inside an organization if your DPO is an internal one. So company, on the other hand, also doesn't really have a lot of interest in I might be radical in saying that, but I think we should all kind of look the truth in the eye and say that, yeah, you might be putting that in your job description, right? When you're hiring, that yes, we're going to, you have development opportunities and whatnot. But to be honest, company cannot love you back. It's not that there is a person who is interested in your personal development. Not really, right? That, like, if you are growing, you're most probably going to need more money and at some point probably leave. What are we getting from this? So in that regard, company has no interest in personal development, and frankly, both sides don't win from that mindset either. And the last disadvantage that I see in having an internal specialist is that they, at some point, their specialization becomes very narrow, which is both good and bad, obviously, depending on how you look at it. But again, in data protection, in the everyday changing landscape, it's important to kind of maintain your overview of what is happening in the world of data protection. But it's not just all bad, obviously. Having an internal specialist can be fantastic. And the very good sides of it is that person is most probably going to have a much better overview. They are inside an organization, they know the processes, and it's super important for the data protection, because in data protection, it's not like you work on your one process and you only interact with your team and that's it. No, you need to know actually the entire company. You need to know what everybody else is doing, every person. So it's super important to have that overview, and it's super important to be able to reach the answers to the questions that you have. Even if you don't really have the overview, that is 100% fantastic. You might need to use that communication, your internal Slack channels, your internal emails, your internal even personal connection to people. When you are able, you're working on a project. I, as an external consultant, very rarely have the opportunity to chat shortly with a client and to ask, or not say, not the client directly, not the official former representative of a client, which is more often the case, but those who I know who have the answer, say it is, I don't know, this one product manager that I know who has the answer. It's not always the case that I can just shortly write them and say, hey, do you have this or that? And can you send me this? Not really the way it's happening for the external consultants, but it is possible for the internal ones, which speeds up the process, which really makes the overview better. So it's a huge advantage.
Yeah. Maria, there is a question concerning DPO appointment and Brexit. So the question from Murat, for a UK company with branches in EU, do they have to appoint a second DPO in EU following the Brexit, or is ICO still binding with EDPB?
This is a very hard question to answer without knowing the exact case. I find it a little bit too broadly phrased. I would tend to say no, you're not obliged to, but don't take it as a consulting advice. I haven't seen the case more, and I don't think that we have the time now to really go into the detail. I'm sorry. I still have another, at least one slide to focus on. But I tend to say no.
There is one more question. Shall I read it now or at the end of the presentation?
Let's do it at the end.
Okay.
Because I'm a little bit behind the schedule. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, it's all right.
My stupid Mac was not really working with me. Anyway, another fantastic thing that in-house DPOs have that not always or very rarely external DPOs have is so-called privacy champions. And I didn't invent this term. It's not something that I am making up right now. It is actually what we say. It is what we use as a formal definition of the people who are privacy advocates inside of a company, who might not be, or who are not privacy experts, and whose job is not to be privacy experts, but they are interested in privacy. Say they are, again, a marketing manager, but they are interested in privacy and they are advocating for it. They are, eager to implement the privacy processes and everything. So this is considered to be one of the, building this network of privacy champions is considered one of the very good practices for a privacy program, and for in-house specialists, it's much easier to do than for an external one. Then you also don't have this hours problem, which is probably the case for any consulting, not only data protection, but in the context of data protection specifically, the hours problem has to do with, you need to set the expectations with the client. When you come to the client, they're asking for a price, right? And the problem here is that client not always knows what they want and what they need because of how complex data protection compliance is. Sometimes they come and say, so we have this product. Well, not sometimes, most often they say, we have this product and we need GDPR, and we don't know what it means. So for us, it is extra hard to first figure out what they need, what kind of GDPR compliance steps we need to do with them, and then calculate the hours on top of that. It's not like I have never worked in, say, financial advising or any other business consulting, but I am imagining that in data privacy, because of how new the topic is for the companies, it is much harder to, you know, communicate how many, what work is going to be done, and on top of that, calculate those hours. So for the in-house specialist, you don't have that problem. You just do your job, and you're going to be, you know, your payment, so to speak, is going to be the same regardless. And trust is obviously also an issue. It is much harder to trust the person who is outside than inside. When somebody is part of your team, it's much easier to, you know, to trust what they say, and that to trust that what they tell you is in your own interest. So that is something that is not always a problem with an external consulting, but it might be, and it much more chances to be for the external ones. Now let's briefly talk about, I know I'm trying to speed up here, but I really want to cover that slide. So external position, the position of an external DPO has its own disadvantages and advantages, of course. First of all, there is no automatic, quote unquote, integration into processes. And obviously there is no automatic integration for an internal one either. But what I mean for this automatic integration is that there is sort of at least a formalized onboarding procedure for the internal specialist who is hired by a company, who has a little bit of time to speed up, a little bit of time to, you know, navigate through what the company is doing, who is doing what, to get to know to people, to, you know, they're there to stay. They have the time to, you know, to first get to know people, to first get to know processes. Consultants don't have that time. They don't have the privilege. They need to integrate themselves much faster, with much less support. So that is very often a huge disadvantage for an external DPO. And as a result, they're also not seen as part of the team. A lot of processes happen. You know that the DPO is supposed to be part of your processes. They are allowed to also initiate the audit, as I previously mentioned. But it's also super crucial to share stuff with them, to let them know that you are starting the new process, to let them know that something is changing in your marketing campaign that you talked about last week and you think it's covered now. Now you're looking for, now you are starting a change. You need to integrate your DPO into that change. And it's not always obvious for people when a DPO is not part of the team. So it might have some even legal implications in terms of if you act thinking that everything is covered, and then you act differently from what was, you know, from what was talked about last week, you might make a mistake. So that's a problem. For a DPO themselves, there is this difficulty with overview, which is, you know, I talked about on the previous slide, I talked about DPOs internally, they have much better overview because they are literally inside the company. For an external DPO, it's not that easy to have that overview. You are very often not even inside the systems. You don't have an internal profile, you don't have an internal email, you're not on the meetings that are, you know, this like weekly meetings, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but still there is a lot of stuff that happens, you know, on its own kind of. And if you're not part of it, you might miss a lot of things that might be important for you or might become important at some point. So that overview of what is happening can be a big problem for an external DPO. And then there is this hours problem, obviously, which I mentioned in the previous slide. So for us, it's for externals, it's always something that we need to, you know, always find a balance, always try to forecast in the best possible way. However, one of the huge advantages of being an external DPO, and it is an advantage both for the company and for the DPO themselves, is that there is very, very unlikely to be a conflict of interest. If you have an external person, you may be sure about that they're telling you the truth, that they will tell you if the process is not compliant. And I'm not trying to say that internal specialists are have an interest of telling lie to you, right? But there is always this possibility, as I talked previously, of being pressured, of being like, your loyalty being questioned and things like that. So externals don't have that. Externals have no interest in, being taking sides, so to speak. So it's going to be always an honest advice. You may be sure about that. There is also a huge advantage about qualification and learning. And I can see, Sergey, you have a question probably. Is that about conflict of interest? Did I say something radical?
Actually, this is the question about qualification and learning. What kind of education do you recommend to get to become a DPO in terms of price, quality ratio?
Oh, this is a fantastic question, and it comes up so often. So yeah, it is for an external DPO, it is an advantage that they have the position of to take care of their own qualification, of their own training, of their own learning. Yeah. And it's good for the company because company doesn't have to take care of it, and it's good for the DPO because they're not tied to anything, right? They decide for themselves. The good news here is that there is no legal definition. Well, it's probably both good and bad news, that there is no legal definition of what certification, what qualification a DPO has to have, even though it is in many ways a very strictly defined position, data protection officer. But their training is not one of those strictly defined aspects. It says, the text itself, it has the wording something about it has to have the knowledge, the sufficient skills in the field of data protection, but it doesn't define exactly which certifications. However, there is a sort of unspoken rule in the international community of data protection officer or data protection specialists in general, that there is a International Association of Privacy Professionals, which is IAPP, and their certifications are considered to be most popular, probably. I'm not going to say about good or bad. I'm not the one to ask about the quality of certifications. I mean, they're certainly good, but I'm not going to compare them to anything else. It doesn't really make much sense to me. But they're certainly the most popular ones. So if you're looking to start somewhere, IAPP might be the place. They have CIP certifications, which are Certified Information Privacy Professional, and they have those divided by regions. One is Europe, one is US, one is Australia, Canada, Asia, and I think that's it. And then they have the manager certification, CIPM, Certified Information Privacy Manager. You also might look into certain national certification. Well, they're not really national, but depending on the country where you are. Germany is a big fan of their own certifications, which is the one I also have. It's certification by TÜV. It's a company or organization that is probably one of the biggest in Europe. It's certainly the biggest in Germany, and it certifies not only people, it also certifies, I don't know, elevators and cars and whatnot. So this is sort of a stamp of approval if you have a TÜV. And they, in Germany, TÜV certification is considered one of the good ones. So look at the context, look at where you are, and also look at what knowledge you already have and what you want to acquire. Because some of those qualifications, some of those certifications, and IAPP is one of them, they are good for gaining credibility, but they not always are good for gaining knowledge. And I say that because they are extremely, extremely difficult. So IAPP certifications are definitely like that. And if you are coming from a completely basic, I'm sorry for that. If you are coming from a completely basic level, if you are a complete beginner, then maybe you need a little bit more knowledge to acquire somewhere else, and then go for a certification. So it's always a balance. And
I'm afraid we're a bit behind the schedule, so if you could, a couple of words about advantages, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
The last probably two of the advantages of external is that the expertise is more diverse, most probably than than the expertise of an internal specialist. And also it often comes in a quote unquote with a team. So you are hiring one person, but they most probably are working with an agency, which is the case for us, for example. We, if a company hires me and I have a question that is too specific, too deep, too rare to meet in everyday professional life, I'm going to go to my colleagues and have not just one mind, but 3 minds or 4 minds working on the same issue, because we are, privacy nerds. We like to solve issues and privacy, and everybody wins with that. So that's how our expertise and experience becomes more diverse and more. Well, I don't want to say that we are. That we have better knowledge. Obviously not. We lack a lot of knowledge in some, very specific cases, like internal specialists might be, their narrow qualification might be a big advantage too. But this is just, to give you different sides of a game. So I'm sorry for being so much ahead, like so much behind on the time, and I'm stealing time from Alexander, but I just wanted to, the last thing that I want to let you know is that this distance that external specialists have to the company and that internal specialists don't have, it can be both an advantage and disadvantage, as you might have seen. So there is no one size fits all. There is no one best model that everybody should use. You should look into your own situation. You should look depending on the circumstances, what budget you have, what kind of company you have, and so on. It's good to have internal people, at least one person who's trained, but it also is very healthy to attract external consultants. Even if you have already a team of internal people, it's also sometimes good to attract external minds to solve some of the issues. Whew, thank you very much for the attention. I'm so sorry it's taken longer than expected.
Thank you, Maria, for your great presentation. It's well designed and with great detail. You showed the advantages and disadvantages, and you was very objective, I would say, because you on the side of externals showed a lot of weak points in hiring external, but a lot of weak points of having just in-house specialists.